everyone. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you today. I'm Dr. Arne May, the editor-in-chief of Cephalalgia, to discuss, to get his perspective on how to write and submit a manuscript for the clinician or young researcher. Dr. May, thank you so much for being here with us today. Designing a study and drafting a manuscript can be very intimidating. Do you have any tips for the first-time researcher?
Writing a manuscript as such, I think that's very important to understand, is that it doesn't start when you open your laptop, but indeed before even starting the actual experiment. You cannot write a good paper if the methods are not sound. So writing a manuscript starts with an ethics vote, obviously, and a pre-registration of your study, for example, with clinicaltrials.org. I find the pre-registration very important. Everyone doing medical studies with medications do know that. And the basic science people are sometimes a little bit hesitant, but it's really good if you can point out that you had the idea before you even started, that you had a proper hypothesis and so on, and that you actually published your hypothesis. And on a more personal note, perhaps, I think it is important to know your authors and positions before you write, and indeed before you even start the experiment. It may sound a little bit ridiculous, but cannot be overstated how important this is. If your results are so good that you want to discuss it in Nature, everyone suddenly wants to be the first author. If the results are not so exciting and maybe negative, no one will dispute that you are going to do all the work. Yeah? In my personal career as a researcher, the one issue that could lead to tears was reliably, I have to say, authorship positions. So it does really make sense to discuss these things so everyone knows who is on the paper and where. And another tip, get your personal ORCID identifier. ORCID is the abbreviation for Open Researcher and Contributing ID, which is the ID that uniquely attaches your own identity to your research work, such as your articles and data sets. And the result would be no more confusion because another researcher has the same name. So with the ID, everyone knows it's actually you, and then you get the credit for the work that you have done.
Thank you so much for this very important tips. And as a review and editor, we always check registration and what was written and what was modified in the registration. So thank you. Authors who write an article or PhD thesis sometimes have an issue with starting, the so-called writer's block. Do you have any tips on how to overcome this?
Yeah, writer's block can be a problem, even for people who publish a lot. And I can tell you, I sometimes still have a writer's block. And there are two tricks that can help you. The first one for beginners is that you don't read what you write. This again sounds ridiculous, but it's a very common mistake for beginners doing their PhD thesis or a paper, is to write a sentence and then read that sentence, and then start correcting that sentence, and then write the second sentence and correct that one, and so forth, and then get frustrated and then throw away the end result. Better is to write a whole section and don't read it at all. Just write and write. It doesn't matter how it sounds. Only when the section is finished, then you have a new look, and then correct in one go. The second trick is for the abstract, for example, to try one sentence each on motive, methods, key results, and then conclusions, of course. And then expand each of these 4 issues and do not exceed 3 sentences at any one. I think that could help. Everyone has his own, her own ways how to deal with writer's block, but these 2 issues could help.
Oh, for sure. These are great tips. One of my mentors, Dr. Loder, was saying perfection is the enemy of progress, right?
Yeah, true.
Correct.
True.
Correct,
true,
leader. We've all been there. How should one organize a manuscript, and are there do's or don'ts?
Yeah. starting like good writing obviously starts with a plan. All manuscripts, of course, have the same structure, like title, abstract, methods, results, discussion, and so on. The key lies in the order lies in the order how you start. And it's perhaps a good idea to start with the methods. I mean, you did the experiment, right? And there's little variance in how to report, since you need to report everything. And then after the methods, write the results. Again, you know the results by heart, and they're easy to write. Just report. And then you have those two already, and then you start perhaps with the introduction, and then with the discussion, and only in the end comes the abstract. And regarding do's and don'ts, use past tense. Don't forget anything. Equipment, materials, methods, statistical tools, and in general, give sufficient detail that the reader can reproduce what you did. Because always remember, it is one of the principles of science that the paper should contain sufficient detail for any reader to allow to this work to be repeated by anyone. Then it is a good paper. Another, there's so many do's and don'ts. Another don't is to mix different synonyms for the same meaning. I think that is a very important thing to understand. For example, when you talk about participants in the methods, then stick to it. Don't call them volunteers in the methods and subjects in the discussion. Reviewers and readers will be confused. The same holds true for the word experiment. Don't call it an experiment in the methods, and then a project in the results, and then another description somewhere else. So whatever you decide in the beginning, you decide how you call it, and from then on, you stick to it. And lastly, I think you should never state 2-hour knowledge, or first time, or very important findings, or we prove, we establish, whatever, we demonstrate. Rather you use we demonstrate, we find, we suggest. That would be good writing.
These are great tips, on, especially to check when there are multiple authors involved, because sometimes that's how mistakes are, I mean, the consistency is lost when everybody writes a different piece. What are the most practical resources authors can read and go through before submitting the manuscript to Cephalalgia to ensure they're not missing key elements?
That would be, of course, the author guidelines. I find it always amazing how many hours go into writing such a manuscript and then so little time into following author guidelines. Following the author guidelines makes sure that there is a specific structure that the editor and reviewers need to see. Also, make sure that you add the relevant reporting lists, for example. This ensures that you have listed all relevant information, didn't forget anything in the manuscript, and you and the reviewers know where it is.
Yeah, these are very important. Everybody can always check the reporting guidelines on the Equator Network website too. Also, the encouraged to contact the editorial office to inquire whether the project would be a good fit, or get feedback on the directions they should take before submitting to Cephalalgia? Yes,
absolutely. If you're unsure whether your manuscript fits the general scope of Cephalalgia or Cephalalgia report, Cephalalgia report, for example, is looking for clinical work in case series. Cephalalgia itself looks for experimental and clinical research. So in general, or my basic rule here would be that Cephalalgia publishes research where we learn something new about the trigeminal-vascular system, be this physiology or pathophysiology, headache or facial pain. And yes, if you're unsure, write to us, and we would need at least the title, perhaps the abstract. Sometimes it's better to have the whole manuscript just to read very briefly through it, whether it fits with our goals or not.
Okay, who should potential also send this to?
You can send it to me personally, like if we're talking about Cephalalgia, that would be me, or it would be the managing editor, Wendy Crank, and then this will be discussed with the editorial board. Great.
Since Cephalalgia is the journal of the International Headache Society with a global readership, do you consider studies that recruited very local populations or discuss local guidelines?
Well, you see that I'm hesitant. Yeah, we may be interested, but this is rare, to be honest. In general, local guidelines from Germany, for example, are unlikely to be interesting for Cephalalgia readers from the rest of the world. Studies that recruited local populations are more likely to be interesting if they mirror a problem that you see in bigger groups as well. But generally speaking, that they may be more likely to be considered for Cephalalgia Reports, the sister journal of Cephalalgia. But in the end, it's about the guiding principle we talked about. Do we learn something new about the trigeminal system? And this could well be in a local population as well, and maybe even just in this local population, and then we are interested. If it's just a me too, then it's probably unlikely that we are interested.
That makes a lot of sense. And you kind of mentioned the answer to this question earlier, but is there a specific direction you wish to take for the journal and specific types of articles that tend to be well cited once published?
That's a very good question, isn't it? How can we know that an article will be well cited before it is published? There are hints, of course, and sometimes you read a manuscript and know instantly, this is new, this is really great, and this will be cited a lot. And then, of course, you read some paper where you think, well, this will not be cited much. However, it's important for the headache society to know, and then it will still be considered. In general, well-written, up-to-date reviews in meta-analysis is likely to be read and cited, and the same holds true for breaking-edge experimental research, of course. Also, studies about new therapy concepts or well-done, controlled is important, medication studies are generally well cited. If you ask me for a direction I wish to take for the journal, well, that would be open access, of course, and you know that we are becoming open access January next year, 23. And that would mean that every knowledge we ever gathered on headache is free and without barriers to read for everyone. And I think it's exciting times, and that the IHS followed this suggestion and that Cephalalgia indeed is becoming a fully open access journal is just wonderful.
It will be amazing that everybody can read it. Dr. May, thank you so much for this very enlightening tips that really speak from your experience. I'm sure they'll be beneficial to our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olivia.